Instagram and TikTok these days is full of recipes, whether it is steaks, cocktails, or vegan. Did you ever wonder what the oldest recorded recipe in the world is? Do you think it's bread, cake, or wine? Nope, not really. While all of these are the earliest items ancient humans did consume, none of these were the earliest recorded recipe in the world. In fact, beer is the oldest recorded recipe in the world. Apparently, ancient humans consumed items necessary to survive and then consumed beer and then thought, yeah, that's something I could use. How does that get made? To know more about where the recipe to beer brewing was first recorded, stick around, as today we talk about the story of beer. The people of Mesopotamia are believed to have been the first brewers, around the year 10,000 BC. They consumed malted barley scraps and a beer-like residue which was consumed through a straw to filter out pieces of bread or herbs in the drink. This residue was probably the remnants of a grain porridge that had fermented naturally with wild yeast, imparting an intoxicating effect to the consumers, who therefore repeated the process. The original brewers are thought to be women. The people of Mesopotamia enjoyed beer so much that it was a daily dietary staple. In fact, they loved beer so much that tavern keepers who would cheat their customers with the quantity of beer were thrown into the water. A daily ration of beer was provided for all citizens. Paintings, poems, and myths depict both human beings and their gods enjoying beer. However, the earliest evidence of beer brewing came from ancient Egypt, which is ironic because today Egypt has a majority Muslim population and the law prohibits the sale of alcohol in a public place. The ancient Egyptians loved their beer so much, they first documented the brewing process on papyrus scrolls around 5000 BC. These early beers were made from dates, pomegranates, and other local herbs, and would be very harsh by today's standards. The Egyptians used beer mainly in religious ceremonies. They even had a goddess of beer called Tenenet. Beer was often used throughout ancient Egypt as compensation for labor. Even the workers in Giza Valley, working on the pyramids, received 3 rations of beer a day. Beer eventually made its way from the Middle East across the Mediterranean to Europe, where it became an integral part of life. This was especially true in countries in northern Europe, like Germany and Belgium, where abundant barley crops provided ample raw materials for brewers. It was in the early Middle Ages what we consider modern beer today was born. Breweries had used malted barley as the main source of fermentable sugar for hundreds of years. But it wasn't until around the 12th century that hops were used as a bittering and flavoring agent. The credit for this goes to who else but the German monks. It had to be. They found that hops added a very pleasant bitterness to beer, which quenched their thirst. And hops were also used as a natural preservative, helping extend the shelf life of beer in a time when there was no refrigeration. Can you imagine having a warm beer? It's an abomination we can do without. German monks were integral to the history of beer. There was a brewer in almost every monastery. Historians attribute many of the innovations in beer brewing, including lagering, to them. In fact, a brewery in Bavaria, Germany, the Weihenstephan Brewery, has a credible claim to being the oldest working brewery in the world, opening shop in 1040 AD. That's 980 years old. It can trace its roots to an abbey in 768 AD. As a document from that year refers to a hop garden in the area paying a tithe to the monastery. A brewery was licensed by the city of Freising in 1040 AD, and that is the founding date claimed by the modern brewery. Soon, Britain too took to beer and became a major brewing center. The first record of hopped beer in Britain was circa 1362, imported from Amsterdam. The earliest mention of beer being brewed in England came in 1412. Many styles of beer familiar to us today have their roots in Britain. Pale ales, porters, and stouts have been brewed in England and Ireland for hundreds of years. Beer became an indispensable part of the British life. The British Army distributed beer to every soldier every day. When the British Empire occupied half of the civilized world, the Royal Navy provided beer to soldiers even in the most remote corners. In fact, a very popular beer, Indian Pale Ale, came about to be due to the need of transporting beer from England to remote areas of the empire, such as India and Burma, without becoming rancid or bitter. British brewers discovered that beers with higher alcohol content and hops as natural preservatives could last longer and could travel long distances around the world. Beer came to the New World with the first European settlers. According to the diaries of pilgrims, they landed at Plymouth Rock because they had no beer and had to brew more. In fact, the first permanent building they built was a brewery. Since then, Americans have been brewing beer. New York and Philadelphia were the earliest brewing centers in the United States. At this point, American beer was based on the English beer, which was already known to the settlers. However, this situation began to change in the middle of the 19th century. Waves of new immigrants from Northern and Central Europe brought in a new taste of beer, which had already occupied the entire continent. Pilsner-style lagers, typical of Germany and the Czech Republic in their taste. Soon, these light, hip, clean beers replaced the darker, heavier beers that had been known to Americans for hundreds of years. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, the growing demand for light beer and the influx of thousands of immigrants brought American beer production to a new level. This was followed by a huge difficult period, Prohibition. From 1920 to 1933, it was illegal to consume alcoholic beverages in the United States. Small and regional breweries lost important sources of income and closed their doors. Some breweries survived by producing malt extract, ice cream, and soft drinks. After Prohibition was lifted in 1933, the United States experienced a severe depression that made it difficult for breweries to recover from the 13 years of madness that was Prohibition. Brand loyalty declined and people's pockets were empty. The beers that became popular during this time are those that expanded during Prohibition by making non-alcoholic brews. So cheaper beers like Budweiser and Schlitz began to be produced in huge quantities. With the increase in sales, their ability to produce cheaper beer also increased, and that made the beer even more cheaper. This trend continued until the late 1970s and early 1980s. At the time of the ban, there were more than 2,000 small breweries in the US, while there were only a few hundred left by 1983. In fact, the Tied House Act, the law that prohibited breweries from selling beverages on their premises, remained in force until the late 1970s. What? Today, there are currently more than 2,000 breweries in the US. Around the world, humans consume over 50 billion gallons of beer every year, making beer the most widely consumed alcoholic drink on the planet. If you like this video and love beer, open yourself a cold one and hit that like button. Comment and tell us what the best beer from your country is, and subscribe to the channel. Many more stories coming soon.